I've always had this instinct that tells me when something's not quite right with Mark, my husband of 6 years. It was during one of those calm evenings where the only sound was the ticking of the clock that I first sensed it. Mark sat across from me, lost in his thoughts, staring blankly at his barely touched dinner. "Mark, what's on your mind? You hardly touched your food," I ventured, trying to keep my tone light. He looked up, attempting a smile. "It's nothing, Clara, just tired, I guess." But I knew him too well to believe that. Mark wasn't the best at hiding things. "Come on, spill it. You've seemed off since you walked through the door," I pressed, sensing there was more to it. With a sigh, he ran his hand through his hair. "Okay, it's my mom. She called today." My heart sank a little. Linda, my mother-in-law, was, well, let's just say she had her own way of doing things, often at odds with the rest of us. "What did she want?" I asked cautiously, preparing myself for whatever news was coming. "She wants to see Jake," he replied, mentioning our 4-year-old son. I was caught off guard. It had been years since Linda had shown any interest in us, especially after the falling out we had. I couldn't help but remember the last time we were all together, the way she had a comment about everything from how I dressed to how I should be raising Jake. I tried to keep my tone light. "Wow, that's unexpected. What did you tell her?" Mark shrugged. "I said I talked to you about it." There was an uncomfortable silence. I knew what he was asking. Despite everything, he wanted his mother to be a part of our son's life. But the memories of her past intrusions, her unasked for advice, and her peculiar ways were too fresh in my mind. "Okay," I finally said. "She can see him, but I have conditions." Mark looked relieved but cautious. "Like what?" "She only visits when I'm around. No unsupervised time with Jake, and no pushing her beliefs on him." He nodded, understanding the unspoken fears behind my conditions. "Fair enough, I'll let her know." As I cleared the table, my mind raced with questions. Had Linda changed? Could I trust her around Jake? I wasn't sure, but one thing was certain: I'd do anything to protect my son. And if that meant facing Linda head-on, so be it. That night, as I tucked Jake into bed, his innocent smile reminded me of what was at stake. I kissed his forehead, promising silently to keep him safe from whatever Linda might bring into our lives again. The day I first met Linda is etched in my memory like a scene from a movie you can't forget no matter how hard you try. Mark and I were engaged, and he had been prepping me about his mother all week. "She's a bit different, Clara. Just keep an open mind, okay?" he had said, a nervous chuckle escaping him. I wasn't sure what he meant by different, but I was about to find out. We drove up to a quaint, slightly overgrown house on the outskirts of town. The door swung open before we even got out of the car, and there she was, Linda, in all her glory. Barefoot with a tie-dye dress flowing around her ankles, she seemed to glide rather than walk towards us. Her hair was a cascade of gray waves, and her eyes sparkled with a kind of mischievous energy. "Mark, and you must be Clara," she exclaimed, pulling me into a surprisingly strong embrace. "Welcome to my sanctuary." The house was like a museum of esoteric artifacts. Crystals hung in the windows, and the smell of incense filled the air. Linda chatted nonstop as she showed us around, her topics ranging from astrology to herbal remedies. As we settled down for tea, she began talking about her lifestyle. "I've been a vegetarian for decades now. Meat clogs the soul, you know, and I draw energy from the earth. That's why I don't wear shoes." I exchanged a glance with Mark. He shrugged as if to say, "I told you." I tried to keep up with the conversation. "That's interesting, Linda. I've never met anyone who lives like this." "Oh dear, there's so much to life that people miss out on. Did you know I'm part of a community that practices sun nourishment? We believe in absorbing energy directly from the sun." I didn't even know what to say to that. I mean, how do you respond to someone who thinks they can eat sunlight? Mark jumped in, probably seeing my struggle. "Mom, why don't you tell Clara about your yoga retreats?" Linda's face lit up. "Oh, they're divine. Yoga is not just exercise, it's a way to align your chakras and cleanse your aura. The rest of the visit passed in a blur of Linda's tales about her travels and spiritual awakenings. It was overwhelming, to say the least. On the drive home, I turned to Mark. "Your mom is certainly unique," I said, trying to find the right words. Mark chuckled. "That's one way to put it. You okay?" I nodded, still processing the experience. "Yeah, just a lot to take in. She's different, all right." Our wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and it was mostly. Linda managed to keep her unconventional comments to a minimum, which I was grateful for. But the real challenge began after the wedding when I found out I was pregnant. I remember breaking the news to Mark and Linda over dinner at our place. Mark was overjoyed, grinning from ear to ear. Linda, on the other hand, had a different reaction. "Congratulations, my dears. This is a sacred time. You must be very careful about the energies around you, especially during pregnancy," she said, her eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and seriousness. I smiled politely, not really sure how to respond. "Thanks, Linda. We're really excited." As my pregnancy progressed, Linda started showing up more often, unannounced, with all sorts of herbs and books on ancient pregnancy practices. One evening, she came over with a big basket filled with who knows what. "Clara, darling, I brought you some natural remedies and superfoods. These will ensure a healthy and spiritually aligned pregnancy," she announced, laying out her collection on our kitchen table. I glanced at Mark, who seemed as perplexed as I was. Thanks, Linda, but my doctor has already given me a diet plan to follow." Linda waved her hand dismissively. "Doctors don't know everything, trust me. These are age-old practices. They've helped women for centuries." Feeling a bit cornered, I decided to let her have her way, thinking it couldn't hurt to try some of her superfoods. That was my first mistake. Days turned into weeks, and Linda's influence over my diet and lifestyle grew. She convinced me to switch to a strict vegetarian diet, cutting out all meat and dairy. I started feeling tired all the time, but Linda assured me it was just my body detoxing. "Your body is cleansing itself, Clara. It's all part of the process," she'd say every time I brought up my fatigue. One day, I was at the grocery store picking up some vegetables as per Linda's pregnancy diet when everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor with a crowd of people around me. I woke up in the hospital with Mark by my side, looking worried. The doctor came in, a stern look on his face. "Mrs. Johnson, you fainted because of severe nutritional deficiencies. This diet you've been on is dangerously low in protein and other essential nutrients. It could have harmed your baby," he explained. I was in shock. All this time, I thought I was doing what was best for my baby. But instead, I was putting both of us at risk. Mark was furious. "I can't believe this. Mom has gone too far this time," he said, squeezing my hand. I nodded, feeling a mix of anger and guilt. "I never should have listened to her. I'm sorry, Mark." "We'll fix this, Clara. No more of Mom's advice. From now on, we stick to what the doctor says," he said. That incident was the turning point. I realized that Linda's intentions, however well-meaning, were not always right. It was a hard lesson learned, but one that I needed to protect my family. After the hospital incident, things changed between Linda and us. Mark and I decided it was best to limit her influence, especially regarding my health and our baby. But Linda, being who she was, didn't take this lightly. A few days after I was discharged from the hospital, Linda called. I braced myself as I answered the phone. "Clara dear, how are you feeling?" Linda's voice was laced with concern, but I could sense the underlying tension. "I'm better, thanks. The doctor has me on a new diet plan now," I replied cautiously. There was a pause on the other end. "I heard about what happened. I'm just so worried about you and the baby, you know. Conventional medicine doesn't always know best," Linda said. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Linda, I appreciate your concern, but the doctor was very clear. The diet you suggested wasn't right for me. It put the baby at risk." Linda's tone shifted, becoming more defensive. "I've been studying these practices for years, Clara. I know what I'm talking about. You can't just dismiss ancient wisdom because of one doctor's opinion." I felt a surge of frustration. It's not just an opinion, Linda, I fainted. The baby could have been hurt. I can't take that risk again. There was a heavy silence before Linda spoke again. I just want what's best for you and the baby. You're part of our family now, and it's my duty to share my knowledge. I knew this conversation was going nowhere. Linda, I need to do what's best for my health and the baby's. That means following the doctor's advice. I could almost hear her shaking her head in disbelief. You're making a mistake, Clara, but it's your choice. I just hope you realize that before it's too late. The call ended shortly after, leaving me feeling drained and uneasy. I knew Linda meant well in her own way, but her refusal to acknowledge the danger she had put us in was alarming. I looked over at Mark, who had been quietly listening. We're doing the right thing, right? I asked, needing his reassurance. He came over and hugged me. Absolutely, we have to put you and the baby first. Mom will just have to understand. The tension with Linda came to a head a few weeks later. She had been calling, leaving messages about various natural remedies and practices she thought we should consider for the baby. Mark and I had agreed to stand our ground, but facing Linda was easier said than done. One afternoon, Linda showed up unannounced. She had a bundle of herbs in her hand and a determined look in her eyes. I opened the door, my heart sinking. Clara, I've brought some herbal supplements for you. They're vital for the baby's development, she said, pushing past me into the house. I closed the door, taking a deep breath. Linda, we've talked about this. I'm following the doctor's advice now. I can't use those. Linda set the herbs on the table, her expression hardening. Clara, you're being closed-minded. These are ancient remedies proven to work for centuries. I could feel my frustration mounting. Linda, I appreciate your help, but what you suggested before was dangerous. I can't risk my baby's health. She turned to face me, her eyes narrowing. I'm only trying to help. You're rejecting valuable knowledge. Do you think you know better than generations of wisdom? Mark walked into the room, sensing the rising tension. Mom, enough. We've made our decision. Clara's health and the baby's safety are our priority. Linda's gaze shifted between us, a mix of anger and disbelief on her face. I can't believe you're choosing to ignore my advice. I'm your mother, Mark, and you, Clara, are carrying my grandchild. I tried to keep my voice calm. Linda, it's not about ignoring you. It's about doing what's medically best for the baby. Linda shook her head, her voice rising. You're both making a huge mistake. When something goes wrong, don't come running to me with that. She stormed out, leaving the herbs on the table. Mark and I exchanged a look, both of us drained. That could have gone better, he said, a sad note in his voice. Yeah, but we had to stand our ground, I replied, feeling a mix of guilt and relief. After that day, Linda stopped calling and visiting. It was a painful estrangement, but Mark and I knew we had made the right choice for our family's well-being. And now she has reappeared in our lives after several years of absence. What will happen next? I didn't know. That day Linda came to visit, I felt a mix of apprehension and hope. After Mark relayed her request to see Jake, our 4-year-old, I had agreed, setting my own terms. She could visit, but only in my presence. As she stepped into our home, I braced myself for what was to come. Hi, Linda, I greeted her cautiously, watching as her eyes instantly found Jake, who was playing on a living room rug. Linda smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Hello, Clara, and is this the young man I've heard so much about? Jake looked up, curious but shy. Hi, he mumbled, clutching his toy car. The visit started smoothly, with Linda making small talk and playing with Jake. She seemed different, more considerate and less imposing than before. It was a relief, yet I couldn't shake off my guard completely. As we sat down for tea while Jake played nearby, Linda's conversation took a familiar turn but with a new twist. I've been exploring more into alternative medicine, Clara. It's fascinating how much we can heal naturally without any pills or chemicals. I tensed, memories of her past advice flooding back. That's interesting, Linda, but I believe in a balance between natural remedies and conventional medicine. Linda nodded, but there was a hint of her old stubbornness in her voice. I understand, but I've moved past conventional medicine entirely now. I've never felt better. I chose my words carefully. It's great that it works for you, Linda, but for Jake, I prefer to stick to the advice of his pediatrician, especially when it comes to medications. Linda paused, her expression thoughtful but not argumentative. I respect your decision, Clara. I just want what's best for Jake in my own way. The visit ended on a positive note, with Linda promising to return soon. After she left, I sat down trying to process everything. It was a step forward, but Linda's complete turn away from conventional medicine worried me. Could I really trust her to respect our choices for Jake's well-being? I shared my concerns with Mark that night. She's trying, I can see that, but her views on medicine, it worries me. Mark nodded, understanding. We'll just have to be vigilant, Clara. We can't let our guard down. As I went to check on Jake, sleeping soundly in his bed, I knew this was just the beginning. Rebuilding trust with Linda would be a delicate balance, one we have to navigate with both our hearts and minds open. It had been a few weeks since Linda's first visit, and things were going surprisingly well. She had been respecting our boundaries, and her visits had become a regular part of our weekends. That's why I didn't worry too much when I had to run some errands one Saturday, leaving Jake with Mark. I was browsing through the aisles of the grocery store when my phone rang. Seeing Mark's name flash on the screen, I answered cheerfully, "Hey, everything okay at home?" "Clara, I had to rush to work for an emergency. I left Jake with Mom. She insisted it was fine." Mark's voice was hurried, intense. My heart skipped a beat. "You left him with Linda alone?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. I know, but I didn't have a choice. It was really urgent," he replied. I cut the call short, my mind racing. I abandoned my shopping cart and rushed to Linda's house. As I pulled into her driveway, I could feel the unease settling in my stomach. I knocked on the door and Linda opened it, a forced smile on her face. "Hello, Clara. Jake's here. We've been having a lovely time." "Where is he, Linda?" I asked, stepping inside. "In the living room," she said, leading the way. I found Jake on the couch, his face red from crying, a makeshift bandage wrapped around his arm. My heart dropped. "Jake, sweetie, what happened?" I rushed to his side. He winced as I touched his arm. "I fell down, Mommy. It hurts." I turned to Linda, my voice shaking. "What did you do to him?" Linda's expression was one of nonchalance. "Oh, he just had a little fall. I put some fern and a bandage on it. It's a natural remedy." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A natural remedy? "Linda, he needs a doctor. This could be serious." Linda shrugged. "He's fine, Clara. Kids fall all the time. He'll be okay." I didn't wait another second. Scooping Jake up in my arms, I headed straight to the car, Linda's protests fading behind me. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed my worst fear. Jake had a fractured arm. I sat there holding his hand while they put a proper cast on, fighting back tears of anger and guilt. Mark arrived soon after, his face a mask of worry and regret. "I'm so sorry, Clara. I should have never left him with her." We both knew that trust had been broken. Linda's refusal to see the seriousness of the situation was the last straw. As much as it pained us, we knew we had to keep her away from Jake for his safety. That night, as I tucked Jake into bed, his small face illuminated by the nightlight, I promised myself that I would always protect him no matter what. The lesson was clear. Sometimes love means having to make hard decisions for the greater good. The confrontation with Linda was inevitable. After the incident with Jake, Mark and I were united in our resolve. We needed to make Linda understand the gravity of her actions. When Linda arrived at our home, there was a palpable tension in the air. She seemed unaware of the seriousness of the situation, her demeanor casual as she greeted us. "Clara, Mark, how's Jake doing?" Linda asked as if nothing significant had happened. I took a deep breath, my words laced with controlled anger. "Linda, Jake had a fractured arm because of your negligence. We need to talk about this seriously." Linda waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, come on, Clara. Kids get hurt all the time. I did what I thought was best." Mark's face reddened with anger. What you thought was best? You ignored basic safety, Mom. You could have seriously harmed our son. Linda scoffed. I'm his grandmother. I was taking care of him. You're blowing this out of proportion. Her casual dismissal of our concerns was like a slap in the face. Blowing this out of proportion. Linda, he could have had more than just a fracture. You refused to get him proper medical attention, I shot back, struggling to keep my voice steady. Mark stepped forward, his voice rising. You're not understanding the seriousness of your actions, Mom. We can't trust you with Jake anymore, not after this. Linda's expression turned to one of mock surprise. Really? You're going to keep me away from my grandson over this? It's not just this, Linda. It's about his safety, something you've repeatedly taken for granted, I said firmly. The argument escalated, with Linda refusing to acknowledge her fault and Mark and I insisting on the new boundaries we needed to set. The conversation reached a boiling point, and Linda stood up abruptly. You know what? Fine. If you're going to be this unreasonable, maybe I shouldn't be part of your lives at all, Linda spat out, her voice laced with bitterness. Mark, usually the peacemaker, didn't back down. If that's what it takes to keep Jake safe, then so be it. With a final glare, Linda stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The room was thick with tension long after she left. I turned to Mark, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. Did we just do the right thing? Mark wrapped his arms around me. We did, Clara. It's our job to protect Jake, no matter how hard it is. As we stood there holding each other in the silence of our home, I knew that this was the end of a chapter in our lives. A painful, necessary end. We had stood our ground for Jake's sake, and while the future was uncertain, I knew we'd face it together, stronger